Hello students, my name is Dr. Suresh. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of English, Dwarkadas Govardhandas Vaishnav College, Arumbakam, Chennai. After the World Trade Center is an essay by Amitav Ghosh. I've taken this essay to give you all an idea as to how words are pronounced when read. I also would like to say that many words, when pronounced individually, they are pronounced differently. But if the same word is put into a sentence and read, sometimes it is different. Moreover, I've highlighted the silent sounds in red, so when you practice, please ignore the red highlighted letters and go with the remaining. Also, the blue highlighted letters are sounds that are not pronounced as it is spelt, but it is pronounced like the one that are given in brackets in green. I again remind you about the instruction. The red highlighted letters are silent. The blue highlighted letters must be replaced with the green ones. I hope you got the instruction. Come on, let's get started. After the World Trade Center by Amitav Ghosh. In 1999, soon after moving to the Fort Greene section of Brooklyn, my wife and I were befriended by Frank and Nicole DiMartini, a couple whose lives were closely twinned with the towers of the World Trade Center. Both Frank and Nicole are architects. As construction manager of the World Trade Center, Frank's offices were on the 88th floor of Tower 1. Nicole is an employee of the engineering firm that built the World Trade Center, Leslie E. Robertson Associates. Hired as a surveillance engineer, she was a member of a team that constructed year-round structural integrity inspection of the Twin Towers. Her offices were on the 35th floor of Tower 2. Frank is 49, sturdily built with wavy salt and pepper hair and deeply etched laugh lines around his eyes. His manner is expensively avuncular and nothing pleases him more than when the conversation turns to a subject on which he can offer expert advice. For Frank, the Twin Towers were both a livelihood and a passion. He would speak of them with the absorbed fascination with which poets sometimes speak of Dante's canzonis. Nicholas, 42, blonde and blue-eyed with a gaze that is at once brisk and friendly. She was born in Basel, Switzerland and met Frank while studying design in New York. They have two children, Sabrina, 10, and Dominic, 8, who are unusually well matched with mine in age, gender, and temperament. It was through our children that we first met. Frank and Nicole's relationship with the World Trade Center was initiated by the basement bomb explosion of 1993. Soon afterwards, Frank was hired to do bomb damage assessment. An assignment that he had thought would last only a few months turned quickly into a consuming passion. He fell in love with the buildings, Nicole told me. For him, they represented an incredible human feat. He was awed by their scale and magnitude, by the innovative design features, and by the efficiency of the use of materials. One of his most repeated sayings about the towers is that they were built to take the impact of a light aeroplane. On the morning of Tuesday, September 11, 2001, Frank and Nicole dropped their children off their school in Brooklyn Heights and then drove on to the World Trade Center. Traffic was light and they arrived unexpectedly early, so Nicole decided to go up to Frank's office for a quick cup of coffee. It was about 8:15 when they reached Frank's office. A half hour later, Nicole pushed back her chair and stood up to go. She was on her way out the door when the walls and the floor suddenly heaved under the shock of a massive impact. Frank's office commanded a panoramic southwards view looking towards the Statue of Liberty and the harbor. Now through the thick plates of glass, she saw a wave of flame bursting out overhead, like a torrent spouting from the floodgates of a dam. The blast was clearly centered on the floor directly above. She assumed that it was a bomb. Neither she nor Frank were unduly alarmed. Very few people knew the building's strength and resilience better than they. They assumed that the worst was over and the structure had absorbed the impact. It was now a question of coping with the damage. Sure enough, within seconds of the initial tumult, a sense of calm descended on their floor. Frank herded Nicole and a group of some 24 other people into a room that was relatively free of smoke. Then he went off to scout the escape routes and stairways. Minutes later, he returned to announce that he had found a stairway that was intact. They could reach it fairly easily by climbing over a pile of rubble. The bank of rubble that barred the entrance to the fire escape was about about knee-high. Just as she was about to clamber over, Nicole saw that Frank was hanging back. She stopped beside him and begged him to come with her, imploring him to think of the family. He shook his head and told her to go on without him. There were people on the floor who'd been hurt by the blast, he said. He would follow her down as soon as he had helped the injured on their way. She could tell that she would have no success in swaying her husband. His belief in the building was absolute. He was not persuaded that the structure was seriously harmed, nor, for that matter, was she. But now she could only think of her children. She joined the people in the stairway while Frank stayed behind to direct the line. Frank must have gone back to the Port Authority offices shortly afterwards, for he made a call from his desk at about 9 o'clock. He called his sister Nina on West 93rd Street in Manhattan and said, "Nicole and I are fine, don't worry." Nicole remembers the descent as quiet and orderly. The evacuees went down in single file, leaving room for the firemen who were running in the opposite direction. All along the way, people helped each other, offering water and support to those who needed them. On every floor there were people to direct the evacuees, and there was never any sense of panic. In the lower reaches of the building there were even electricity. The descent took about half an hour, and on reaching the plaza, Nicole began to walk in the direction of the Brooklyn Bridge. She was within a few hundred feet of the bridge when the first tower collapsed. It was like the onset of a nuclear winter, she recalls. Suddenly everything went absolutely quiet, and you were in the middle of a fog that was as blindingly bright as a snowstorm on a sunny day. It was early evening by the time Nicole reached her home in Fort Greene. She had received calls from several people who had seen Frank on their way down the fire escape, but he had not been heard from directly. Their children stayed with us that night while Nicole sat up with Frank's sister Nina, waiting by the telephone. It was decided that the children would not be told anything until there was more news. Next morning, Nicole decided that her children had to be told that there was no word of their father. But she and Nina were calm and perfectly collected when they arrived at her door. Although they had not slept all night, neither their faces nor their bearing betrayed the slightest sign of what they had lived through. Nicole's voice was grave but unwaveringly as she spoke to her children about what had happened the day before. "I was awed by her courage. It seemed to me that this example of everyday heroism was itself a small victory. If such could be imagined over the unspeakable horror the city had witnessed the day before." The children listened with wide-eyed interest, but soon afterwards they went back to their interrupted games. A little later, my son came to me and whispered, "Guess what Dominic's doing?" "What?" I said, "Stealing myself. Is learning to wiggle his ears." This was, I realized, how my children, or any children for that matter, would have responded, turning their attention elsewhere during the age that would pass before the news began to gain purchase in their minds. At about noon, we took the children to Fort Greene Park. It was a bright, sunny day, and the children were soon absorbed in riding their bicycles and scooters. In the meanwhile, my wife Deborah and I sat on a shaded bench and spoke with Nicole. "An hour passed between the blast and the fall of the building," she said. "Frank could easily have got out in the time. The only thing I can think of is that he stayed back to help with the evacuation. Nobody knew the building like he did, and he must have thought he had to do so." Nicole paused. "I think it was only because Frank saw me leave that he decided that he could stay," she said. "He knew that I'd be safe and the kids would be looked after. That was why he felt he could go back to help the others. He loved the towers and he had complete faith in them. Whatever happens, I knew that what he did was his own choice. Thank you."